Most people believe control looks like pressure, like force, like someone telling you what to do, but the most effective forms of control rarely feel like that. They feel normal. They blend into routine. They arrive disguised as convenience, stability, and common sense. They don't demand obedience. They invite participation. You wake up at roughly the same time each day. You follow familiar paths. You respond to expectations that no one explicitly states anymore. Nothing about it feels violent. Nothing feels imposed. And that is precisely why it works. A prison built on discomfort requires constant resistance. A prison built on comfort requires none. The modern individual is rarely restrained from the outside. Instead, they are gently held in place by patterns that feel earned, chosen, and socially approved. Schedules that appear practical. Goals that seem reasonable. Responsibilities that feel unavoidable. Over time, these structures stop being questioned, not because they are perfect, but because they are familiar. Familiarity creates trust, and trust creates compliance without awareness. This is not about conspiracy or hidden enemies. It is quieter than that. It is about how systems evolve when force becomes inefficient. When control no longer needs to threaten, it begins to soothe. Most people are not trapped because they are weak. They are trapped because the cage feels indistinguishable from life itself. They are rewarded for staying inside it, validated for adapting to it, praised for enduring it without complaint. The language used around them reinforces this adaptation. Words like responsibility, productivity, realism, and maturity quietly define the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Anything outside those boundaries is labeled risky, immature, or naive. So the walls don't need to be reinforced. They are maintained internally. Over time, the question of freedom changes shape. It is no longer, am I allowed to leave? It becomes, why would I want to? That question feels reasonable, practical, even wise. And yet, something subtle begins to fade. A sense of depth, a sense of inner movement, a quiet awareness that life has narrowed, even as options appear to multiply. Nothing dramatic happens, no alarm sounds. The individual remains functional, capable, and outwardly free, which is why the prison remains invisible, and why most never feel the need to look for its walls. There was a time when control depended on visibility. Rules were enforced openly, consequences were clear, power announced itself. That form of control had limits. It required energy, it created resistance, and resistance over time produces awareness. When pressure is obvious, people eventually recognize it as pressure. So systems adapted, not by becoming harsher, but by becoming quieter. The most stable forms of control are not imposed from above, they are absorbed from below. Instead of demanding obedience, they cultivate identification. Instead of restricting movement, they define what movement should look like. Force creates friction. Friction slows systems down. Comfort does the opposite. When a structure provides predictability, safety, and reward, it no longer needs enforcement. People begin to protect it themselves. They organize their lives around it. They defend it when questioned. They feel unsettled when it is absent. This is not accidental. Efficiency favors systems that require minimal supervision, and the most efficient supervision is internal. Over time, expectations replace commands, standards replace threats, social cues replace laws. A person does not need to be told what is acceptable when they have learned to sense it instinctively. They adjust their tone, their ambitions, their self-image. Not because someone is watching, but because someone might be. Eventually, even that someone disappears. What remains is habit. The individual continues to perform roles long after the original reasons for those roles have faded. They follow structures that no longer need justification. This creates a particular psychological state, one where obedience feels like alignment, where limitation feels like responsibility, where compliance feels mature. And because nothing overt is being taken away, nothing appears stolen. Freedom is not denied. It is redefined. It becomes the freedom to operate efficiently inside predefined paths. The freedom to choose between approved options. The freedom to optimize oneself for a system that already exists. At this stage, force would be disruptive, unnecessary. The system no longer needs to control the body. It has learned how to shape the mind. And once that happens, resistance feels irrational, even dangerous. Because what is being resisted no longer feels external. It feels like reality itself. Routine is often described as neutral, something practical, a way to reduce friction in daily life. But routine is not passive. It is a psychological agreement, repeated until it no longer feels like a choice. Each routine begins as a solution, a way to manage time, a way to stay organized, a way to function within complexity. And at first it feels empowering. You decide when to wake up, how to structure your day, what deserves attention and what does not. But repetition has a subtle effect. What begins as structure slowly becomes expectation. What begins as choice slowly becomes obligation. The body adapts first. Sleep cycles align. Energy rises and falls on schedule. Then the mind follows. Thoughts start to move in predictable patterns. Creativity is confined to specific hours. Rest is allowed only after productivity. The routine stops serving life. Life begins serving the routine. This shift is rarely noticed because nothing breaks. Everything continues to work. That is the danger. A broken system invites reflection. A functioning one rarely does. Over time, the routine becomes moralized. Discipline is praised. Consistency is rewarded. Deviation is subtly discouraged, not through punishment, but through discomfort. You feel uneasy when you break your pattern, guilty when you rest outside approved moments, anxious when you are unproductive without justification. No one needs to correct you. You correct yourself. The routine becomes an internal supervisor. It tells you when you are allowed to feel satisfied, when you have earned rest, when your existence is justified for the day. And because the routine produces visible results, income, progress, stability, it appears unquestionably rational. To question it feels irresponsible. So the contract remains unspoken yet binding. In exchange for predictability, you surrender spontaneity. In exchange for security, you surrender depth. In exchange for order, you surrender uncertainty. And with it, a certain kind of inner freedom. The agreement is renewed daily, silently, automatically. Most people do not notice the moment when routine stops being a tool and starts being a boundary. They only notice a vague sense of compression, a narrowing of possibility, a quiet feeling that life is moving but not expanding. And because routine never announces itself as control, it remains trusted. It does not need walls, it only needs repetition. And repetition, when sustained long enough, becomes law. Modern life is filled with choices. What to watch, what to buy, what path to take next. This abundance creates the impression of freedom. But choice alone does not equal autonomy. Most choices exist inside corridors that were designed long before the individual arrived. They offer variation without divergence, selection without transformation. You can choose how fast to move, but not whether movement itself is necessary. You can choose the style of your life, but not the structure it must fit into. The system does not need to limit options, it only needs to frame them. Within that frame, choice becomes a form of participation. You feel active, engaged, responsible. But the deeper questions remain untouched. Why this path? Why this rhythm? Why this definition of success? Those questions rarely appear, not because they are forbidden, but because they feel impractical. They interrupt momentum. So attention is redirected toward optimization. How to be more efficient, more balanced, more productive, more resilient. The language of self-improvement reinforces this redirection. The individual is encouraged to refine themselves, not to question the environment they are refining themselves for. Problems are framed as personal misalignments. Fatigue becomes a mindset issue. Dissatisfaction becomes a lack of gratitude. Restlessness becomes a failure to adapt. This creates a subtle inversion. Instead of evaluating the system, the individual evaluates themselves. And because the system provides constant feedback, metrics, comparisons, benchmarks, this self-evaluation feels objective, neutral, but it is not. It narrows perception. The corridor feels wide because it contains many doors, but all doors lead to variations of the same room. Over time, people become highly skilled at choosing within constraints. They learn how to navigate the maze efficiently. They stop asking whether the maze itself needs to exist. This is not deception, it is design. A system that allows choice without questioning appears generous, it appears free. And those who thrive within it are held up as proof that it works. Those who feel constrained blame themselves. They assume they chose incorrectly, not that the range of choices was already limited. So the illusion persists. Freedom feels present, yet something essential remains untouched. Because the most important choice, whether to accept the corridor at all, is never framed as an option. And what is never framed is rarely seen. Discomfort is often treated as a signal of danger, something to be reduced, managed, eliminated. In modern systems, discomfort is rarely interpreted as information. It is interpreted as malfunction. If something feels unstable, the assumption is that something is wrong, not with the structure but with the individual's ability to adapt to it. This creates a specific relationship with unease. Discomfort becomes suspicious. Silence becomes unsettling. Periods without direction feel irresponsible. So when the familiar rhythm breaks, anxiety appears quickly. Not because something terrible is happening, but because the internal compass has been calibrated to movement, not meaning. Stillness exposes this. Moments without structure reveal how dependent the psyche has become on external scaffolding. Without schedules, without roles, without clear objectives, a subtle emptiness surfaces. Not dramatic, just uncomfortable. And that discomfort is enough to drive people back into routine, back into noise, back into obligation, back into systems that tell them who they are and what they should be doing next. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. When a person is trained to associate worth with activity, absence of activity feels like erasure. So discomfort is avoided, not because it harms, but because it threatens identity. The unfamiliar always feels dangerous, when familiarity has become the source of psychological safety, even if that familiarity is constraining. Over time, the system learns this. It does not need to punish deviation. It only needs to let discomfort do the work. Those who step outside the expected path often return on their own, not because they are forced, but because the silence becomes unbearable. The absence of external validation creates an internal vacuum, and the system is always ready to fill it again, with tasks, with roles, with incentives. So people learn to distrust moments of unease. They label them as laziness, confusion, or instability. They do not recognize them as signals that something deeper is misaligned, signals that the structure supporting them may also be confining them. Instead, they seek relief, and relief is easy to find. Comfort is always available, which is why discomfort feels like a threat. Not because it is harmful, but because it interrupts the very mechanisms that keep the invisible prison intact. And interruptions in systems built on continuity feel intolerable. Belonging is one of the strongest incentives a system can offer, not because it is artificial, but because it addresses something real. Humans do not simply want to survive. They want to be recognized, to be seen as legitimate, to feel aligned with something larger than themselves. Modern systems understand this well. They rarely demand loyalty directly. Instead, they attach belonging to performance. You belong if you keep up, if you participate, if you maintain the rhythm. The cost is rarely explicit. It is paid through attention, through time, through constant self-adjustment. You learn how to speak in acceptable ways, how to present yourself, how to signal competence, balance, and stability. These signals are subtle, but they are noticed. They determine who is trusted, who is taken seriously, who is included. So people invest in them. They invest in appearances that communicate control, in narratives that suggest progress, in identities that fit neatly within existing frameworks. This investment feels voluntary. After all, no one is forcing participation, but withdrawal has consequences, not dramatic ones, quiet ones, reduced relevance, fewer invitations, a subtle sense of drifting to the edges. And for a social organism, edges feel unsafe. So most people continue paying. They pay with adaptability, with silence around certain questions, with the gradual narrowing of what they allow themselves to express. Belonging becomes conditional, not overtly, but perceptibly. You feel it when conversations avoid depth, when curiosity is redirected toward practicality, when deviation is met with polite discomfort. The message is not spoken, it is felt. Stay within range, stay understandable, stay functional, and you will remain included. This creates a particular tension. The system does not need to suppress individuality. It only needs to reward conformity consistently enough that divergence becomes inconvenient. Over time, people internalize this calculation. They choose alignment over exploration, stability over uncertainty, acceptance over authenticity, not because they are unaware of the trade-off, but because the cost of not belonging feels too high. So the payment continues, quietly, routinely. The individual remains surrounded by others, yet increasingly distant from themselves. Belonging is maintained, but something else is gradually surrendered. And because this exchange is normalized, it does not feel like loss. It feels like adulthood, like responsibility, like simply how life works, which is why the system never needs to enforce it. People enforce it on themselves, in order to remain inside, in order to remain seen. A prison without guards does not announce itself. There are no orders to follow, no threats to obey, no visible barriers to resist. Everything appears open, and yet movement follows predictable paths. By this point, the structure no longer needs reinforcement. It is sustained through familiarity, reward, and quiet self-regulation. The individual knows how to behave without being told. They know what is acceptable to want. They know which thoughts should remain internal, not consciously, instinctively. The system does not watch, it reflects. It mirrors expectations back to the individual through norms, metrics, and subtle feedback loops. Approval feels natural. Disapproval feels personal. So there is no enemy to confront, only patterns to maintain. And because those patterns are tied to identity, to worth, to belonging, to stability, questioning them feels destabilizing. It feels like questioning reality itself. This is why the most effective prisons feel invisible. They do not restrict movement. They define meaning. They tell you what effort is for, what success looks like, what kind of life is reasonable to desire. Anything outside that frame appears unrealistic, indulgent, or irresponsible. So even when the walls are sensed, they are rarely approached. The individual adjusts instead. They lower expectations, they rationalize dissatisfaction. They reinterpret constraint as maturity, and the system remains intact. Not because it is flawless, but because it is familiar. Because it offers continuity in exchange for depth, safety in exchange for uncertainty, belonging in exchange for inner space. No guard is needed when the inmate knows how to stay inside. No lock is required when leaving feels more threatening than remaining. This is the quiet truth most people never confront. They are not held in place by force. They are held by what they have learned to protect, their routines, their identities, their sense of normalcy. And because these feel personal, the prison feels self-chosen, which makes it nearly impossible to see. The opening question was never about freedom. It was about comfort, about how something can feel safe while slowly narrowing the field of being alive. Nothing dramatic needs to change for this to continue. Life can remain functional, stable, predictable, and still feel subtly incomplete. The prison does not collapse. It does not tighten. It simply persists, quietly. As long as no one pauses long enough to notice that what feels like life has also become the walls. If this perspective resonates, consider subscribing to Alchemy of Mind. Here, we continue observing the patterns most people live inside, calmly, without urgency, and without telling you what to think.